Hi, everybody. Welcome to Built by BIPOC. I'm Carissa Begonia. I'm the founder of Conscious Exchange. I'm a second-generation Filipino-American daughter of immigrants. I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner specializing in AAPI identities and experiences, and I'm as well a business and leadership coach for BIPOC professionals and entrepreneurs. I started Built by BIPOC because I am just tired of hearing that there isn't enough BIPOC talent out there. I'm also really tired of just being the first, the only, and the other, often in the spaces I find myself in. So here today, I'm going to be highlighting the journeys and practices of BIPOC entrepreneurs and company leaders who are claiming their seats at the table or building their own tables and advancing DEI in the workplace. So today I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend, Catarina Rivera. Hello, Catarina.
Hello.
So Catarina is a disability public speaker, a DEI consultant, and a content creator with over 14 years of experience in the public sector. Catarina works with companies to improve disability awareness, inclusion, and accessibility. She's the founder of Blindish Latina, a platform smashing disability stigmas through storytelling and advocacy. Catarina has worn hearing aids from a young age and was diagnosed with a progressive vision disability at 17 years old. She's a BA from Duke University, a master's in education from Bank Street College of Education, and a master's in public health from Hunter College. Catarina is also a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. She's also named one of LinkedIn's top voices on disability advocacy for 2022 and is booked out keynote and TEDx speaker and recently spoke at the TEDx Roland Park in June 2022. So our theme today is about authenticity, transparency, and intersectionality. So welcome, Catarina, and thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to kick things off, would just really love for you to share with the audience. You know, I've had such wonderful conversations with you and would love for you just to introduce yourself a little bit more.
For sure. So hi, everyone who's listening. I'm Catarina Rivera. I'm Cuban and Puerto Rican. I was born and raised in Maryland in the United States. My parents taught me Spanish as my first language. I've also been disabled my whole life. My first disability was being hard of hearing, and I've worn hearing aids since I was a toddler. Oh, I have my hearing aids here. When I was 17, I was diagnosed with a progressive vision disability called Usher syndrome. Today, I have a small window of central vision remaining, and I also use a white cane to help me navigate the world. From a career standpoint, I started my career with Teach for America as an elementary school educator, teaching bilingual education. I then moved into nutrition and public health, earning my MPH degree and transitioning into roles in different New York City nonprofit organizations. I did food justice work, community engagement work, and capacity building work. In 2020, I started my Instagram account, Blindish Latina, to share my story as a proud disabled Latina woman. I turned it into a business in 2021 and started working as a public speaker, DEI consultant, and content creator.
Thanks, Catarina. You know, what's been fun since I first met you about 2 years ago is just kind of watching your journey, right? And so you say you started with working, obviously a lot of us work in the workplace, and then started Blindish Latina. So, and we're going to get into talking more about your entrepreneurial journey. But I just wanted to kind of highlight how it's been fun to just kind of watch you build and create this over time, and just kind of feeling a little bit like you're like a partner. Like we're kind of, I feel like, started around the same time-ish and started growing slowly on LinkedIn and such. And so I'm just really excited and honored to kind of have been kind of by your side on it. So and learning like with each other. But with that, with that, I often, again, talk about being first, the only, the other in spaces. And I feel like in your journey, if we've talked about things, you've probably also found yourself in those same situations, whether it was for like disability advocacy, whether it's being Latina, or just I don't know, like just having different ideas, right? I think sometimes as even an entrepreneur, we have new ideas that people haven't thought of. So naturally we kind of go out there and share things, right? And that's part of the fun of it. So would love to hear a little bit about more from you about, that experience of potentially being that first, the only, the other in a room, and what that feels like, or what that has felt like, and how that has really kind of shaped either who you are right now today, or how that's helped kind of inform your work.
It's such a meaningful question, and I feel that it could go in so many different directions, just like you said. As a white passing Latina, I don't often feel othered within my Latinidad, my Latina identity. With my disability, it's another story. Because I use a white cane now, I get stared at all the time, especially when traveling. Recently, I was in Portugal and I was walking to the grocery store. I was stared at all by everyone. And I was also grabbed while waiting to cross to the street. It's very jarring for me. I don't have peripheral vision. So I just felt a hand out of nowhere clamping on my arm. And it was someone who thought I might need help, but that's not the respectful or comfortable way to interact with me or any disabled person. So, and it's just really something that happens often without permission. When I'm out in the world, it feels like sometimes I have to have a hard shell and not let these things bother me. This kind of lack of awareness that I see, a lack of exposure that people have to a blind person out there living independently, living their life. But it is frustrating, is annoying. Many disabled people have stories of strangers asking us personal questions or wanting to know our stories just to satisfy their own curiosity. This can be draining. Within my Latine identity, I remember I was in high school when I realized the privilege that I held within my community. My parents both have master's degrees and are English dominant. I grew up in the suburbs and had a fairly sheltered life. I was interning at a nonprofit organization one summer, and I served on their youth advisory board, along with program participants who were mainly Latina youth from Washington, D.C. and Virginia. I heard their stories of challenges in school, discrimination, violence, etc., and it made me acutely aware of the privilege that I held in that moment. This experience really moved me to do something with my privilege and has guided me in my whole career path. I've always sought out impactful work. I've always wanted to wake up every day and know that what I was doing mattered for the world and for my community.
Yeah. You're right. This question can take so many paths, and even your answer, like, I want to go in a couple different directions. I think what I'll start with is, the identity and privilege, right? And in some capacity, you naming that you're being white passing, you're able to maybe, move through the world differently than say some other folks in the, Latinx community, and naming that, right? And also in other experiences, your like disability is another like identity that where you don't have the same privileges, right? And even being grabbed and us, that would be jarring for I think anybody to be grabbed by a stranger, right? I'm from New York, so personal space is a whole like thing, but and then and for the reasons maybe you're being grabbed, and then to have to tell your story about all the things, right? So I think the first part of that is really curiosity around, you know, how like how your privilege, yes, you've built kind of your business potentially with privilege, and also to inform folks of um, an identity that people aren't as comfortable with or talking about or experience with, and don't know like how to behave, right? Like that, and to support people. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Mm. It's just I think there's just in the world, we have such a difference in terms of disabled people's presence in society, their access to all opportunities and spaces. And within ableism, there is then a difference in power between disabled people and non-disabled people. So there's not actually a responsibility on disabled people to educate non-disabled people about ourselves, but that's often what we are expected to do. There's just an entitlement energy that comes at us. And so I believe very firmly that anyone can hold boundaries around that. Sometimes people feel they need to answer questions. Otherwise, people will never learn. But I choose to do this work. And when I'm on the clock, I'm on the clock. But when I'm not, then I can decide whatever my boundaries are. But there's just work to do with disability in general, with discrimination and stigma, and especially when you look at the differences between cultures and countries. There's there are places where disabled people are still kept at home and are not in school, are not really in society.
Wow. Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that some of the access or privilege and such we have in the US versus moving into other countries. And I know you've been traveling a bunch too, so like learning also different like cultural norms and such on top of what you're really educating folks in the US is there's a lot of like, I'm sure that you are both experiencing and teaching whether you want to teach or not. And it's great that you can put those boundaries in because I think a lot of us don't necessarily know how until we start to really feel confident in our identity, who we are. And especially, I think, in this work of equity work, there's a balance, right? Or it's like, are these teaching opportunities? And when it's like, I'm on vacation, leave me alone, right? And, and I don't know about you, but I definitely sometimes struggle with that. And it's really the answer is when people ask, like, what do you do? I'm like, it's situational. And what's your energy level at that time, right? Like, what do you feel that kind of energy exchanges even right between folks? Just so much around that and like just the boundary setting. Thanks, Catarina. I'll say too, speaking still around identity, often we're kind of, especially like I'll say from a racialized identity standpoint, I know that I haven't always embraced mine. And I don't always I don't necessarily lead with telling people like, "Hey, I'm Asian," right? I think it's something that's put upon me, and I've talked about like I know I've talked about this with you and other folks of these racialized labels aren't necessarily ones that we claim. Like I will more say I am Filipina, right? But I don't walk around like call myself Asian all the time. And so I think it's just kind of interesting sometimes experience that people like racialized folks have of being told what we are, right? I grew up not knowing, growing up in a very dominantly white like neighborhood. I grew up not knowing any difference until like I was made to know on a vacation that I was different by a child, right? So I was curious for you, your work revolves around some of your identity, and so has that always been the case, right? Have you always claimed being Latina? Have you always claimed, your disabilities and such and say, hey, these are opportunities for me to be empowered and also teach and help like myself and others?
Mm. When I was young, my parents taught me Spanish as my first language. I didn't know any other reality, even though I was born in the United States. When I went to school, I would cry every day because I didn't understand what they were saying. And that was a time early in my life where I must have somehow realized that I had a different identity than the other people. When I grew up, as I was growing up, my parents would take us places. They took us to Puerto Rico, Miami, New Orleans, Spain, and Cuba, where I had family members. This gave me such a positive view on being Latina because I loved my culture. I loved the food, the dancing, the dominoes, the way we could all talk really loudly. and connect, even though we were from different places. So I just remember a shift in terms of my identification with Latinidad when I went to college, because where I grew up, I didn't have a lot of Latino kids in school. That wasn't really the makeup of the schools I attended. But when I went to college, I had this opportunity to really connect with people who had all different kinds of origins, not just Cubans, Puerto Ricans like me. So I got really into it. I got into salsa dancing, and I joined the Latino student organization and got very involved in leadership. This was so powerful for me to make these connections, and I just took advantage of every opportunity I had. I was able to travel to Argentina. I soaked it all up. I took Spanish literature classes, flamenco. So this was really powerful for me. And it felt very grounding, because I felt like if I had grown up in Miami, my sense of being Latina would have been so different. It would have just been everything around me. I would have been totally immersed in my culture and also felt the power of it, because it is dominant in that region. So that was really important for me. And I really loved connecting with my identity. I definitely, it's always still complex. For example, when visiting Cuba, I was challenged by my privilege and just the fact that, I had family members that couldn't leave, and just the freedom that I had to go there and leave. There's so much with there to talk about, but I know that a lot of Latino people talk about feeling in between. And that's just the shared sentiment where you don't feel like you belong in your home country anymore. It's not really your place anymore, but you also don't quite belong in America. And so I definitely still identify with that. And this construction of Latinidad is also a new thing for people in America, because we identify with our culture, our country, being Cuban, being Puerto Rican, what that means. Then we come together and, okay, now we're in a group all together. And yes, there are some similarities. Yes, Caribbeans, there's a lot of Caribbean connections. But then, if I'm connecting with someone from Chile, it's just going to be different. But we all are in this like one group, which I think is interesting. It doesn't make sense to some people. For me, I've embraced it, but also like want to highlight those complexities and nuances.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll share is just for my disability. I didn't have that same experience. It took me a long time to be proud of my disability, especially with blindness. I was very much into not talking about it, hiding it, trying to appear non-disabled and not tip anyone off when I was in public. And that was my life for quite some time. So I'm very proud of my journey where now I'm publicly disabled, and it's a very different feeling. I see it as a part of me, it's a part of who I am, and I'm proud of who I am and all the parts of me.
Yeah, that's beautiful that it's a journey, right? It's not something sometimes we totally embrace. And again, different parts of us might take some time for us to feel empowered by and feel good about, especially when we're in a world where we're again constantly told that we're different, right? Even by our own cultures or families and such, something is different here, right? And that can be hard. And kind of with that, I think about, you know, struggling a little bit, whether that's either as a leader or as an entrepreneur or just a human, with self-doubt, right? At some point, again, in these spaces where we're again told that we do not belong, like you are other, you are different, you know. What is just something for you that you've done that either you thought you couldn't do or that someone said you couldn't do? And I'd love to hear a little bit more like did you surprise yourself, or how did you, or did you surprise other people? Like, I'd love to hear about that.
The TEDx talk was a big deal for me. It wasn't exactly that I didn't feel I could do it. It was just very intimidating. And I felt like I wasn't ready yet, that I had to wait. But one of my goals for this year, for 2022, was to secure a TEDx talk. I have a business coach, and we spoke about it right in January. I surprised myself by applying to a TEDx talk a few weeks later after that conversation. It required me to submit a full script, which I didn't have. I came up with a script, and I still feel like I don't know how these ideas came to me because everything honestly flowed. I created this script that flowed out of me, applied, and then waited. When I heard a few weeks later that I had been selected, I was like thrilled. It was such a huge dream of mine. I couldn't believe it was going to happen now, like sooner than I thought. It's so intense leading up to the big day. It's a very intense preparation process. And I do feel like I surprised myself with how well I did with the actual talk. I was concerned about sounding natural, about my hand movements, and about remembering everything. I actually had messed up in my dress rehearsal where I blanked out completely and forgot a section of my speech. But on the actual day, I showed up and felt like an athlete. I did my warm ups, I drank water, I listened to music, I got my head in the game. I went out onto that stage and delivered my talk exactly the way that I wanted to. The dream in my head, the dream I had been visualizing every morning for months, turned into reality. And that was just magical for me.
Congratulations on that. I know that doing any type of TEDx kind of talk is intense, and it's challenging to do. And that's just so exciting. It's exciting for me to hear, just as like also a speaker, that hey, like just try it, just do it and see what happens, right? Just go. And you mentioned not feeling ready, right? And I think that's a lot of a feeling too of like newer entrepreneurs. I'm going to shift a little bit into entrepreneurship now, about not feeling ready. I hear this all the time, and when you are an entrepreneur, it's like, I'm not ready for a TED talk, or I'm not ready to like launch that new thing, right? Or I'm not ready, So would love to hear a little bit too about, what, when you finally, I know, more recently, I know, left your full-time role and was working on Blindish Latina part-time, right? Or alongside your work. Would love to hear, so, for folks in the audience who are thinking about like transitioning or starting something when they're not ready, right? Kind of, or leaving when they're not ready, we'd love to hear from you. Like, what made you feel more confident to start your business or to leave your full-time job? Were you ready?
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Entrepreneurship. We're going to have some gems here. But I've always been interested in entrepreneurship. My mom has had her own business for over 35 years. She's my role model. She's a CPA. I knew I wanted to figure out how to have time freedom and a business that would allow me to work from anywhere. That was a long-term goal of mine, but I didn't really know how it was going to happen. In my entrepreneurial journey, because it's been a journey, I've started multiple businesses and projects, and I've learned from each one. Many of them were not designed to make money because I've been in that nonprofit and social impact space for so long. They still taught me a lot, and those skills carry over into what I'm doing today. In terms of what made me start Blindish Latina, the pandemic really gave me that boost to not wait any longer, to try to get things done. I had been thinking for a while about sharing my disability story on Instagram and creating a new account. I met another disabled Latina named Mariela Paulino right before the pandemic, and we wanted to start collaborating on creating virtual events. This made me finally get my account started. So we were doing that all 2020. Near the end of the year, I received feedback from another amazing disabled entrepreneur named Tiffany Yu. I was basically doing too much and I hadn't fully established Blindish Latina as a brand. So she recommended I focus on that and really build it out. So I took that advice and created a strategy for the next year, for 2021. I knew that, okay, now I wanted to turn it into a business. I focused first on building my authority on LinkedIn and Instagram from January through May. And then I officially launched my business in May 2021. And in terms of like getting the courage to leave a full-time job, something that I learned earlier in my life is that when you take a leap and you have a safety net, like everything's going to be okay. But when I was 25, I had already quit my job as a teacher to start a nonprofit program. I learned and how opportunities can come to you. I saw this in action. I had savings, but I was a little bit worried about how long my money would last. But I actually started attracting a lot of opportunities. I realized the power of acting in alignment with my vision and my values and creating space in my life for what I wanted. So since I had that experience, and I actually eventually ended that nonprofit and went back to work full time, I haven't been afraid of quitting my job. Like, what's the worst that can happen? I always maintain savings. And I didn't quit my job this time until I had a viable business that was already earning revenue. So I think that's the way to do it. When I left my full-time role, this time the timing was such, I just knew I had reached a point that I was too busy with both and I was going to burn out. So I set a date and went for it.
I love it. I wish this interview was like another 30 minutes long because I have so many things to ask you about, like even just entrepreneurship alone. But I love that you shared that it's that first iteration, that it's like perfectionism is not cannot be the thing here, right? Like the first iteration is not what we'll do probably in reality, like what we'll really end up with, right? And so I'll also share with myself, it's taken me probably 5 years also to like really like this is it, right? And I think it's about experimentation and doing and trying that allows us to feel confident about like really then diving into the thing, right? But and whether you do that while alongside working, I think that's a great folks who have full-time jobs, you might lack time to be able to build your business, but you have a little bit, maybe say security, like some finances, where your health insurance is coming from, things like that, that allow you to experiment, right? And I think we don't talk so much about the experimentation. People see what we're like, where we are today. They see you as the TED Talk speaker and such, but they don't see that took X amount of years for you to land on Blindish Latina, for you to then land on, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on. But we wouldn't know what we would want to focus on without actually trying probably first too, right?
Mhm.
So I love that. We are wrapping up or coming closer to the end of this. So I do, as much as I love inspiration, I am like ready to have another conversation with you, but we have to kind of wrap things up. I'll say, I love inspiration and I also like practical advice. And so for folks listening, watching, would love to hear like one practical tip for someone, whether that's really who's not maybe also like thinking about an entrepreneur journey, who's thinking about leaving. What's something you could leave? What's a great tip for someone?
Well, I'll just reiterate what I said about making sure you have a viable business that is earning revenue. And I recommend having at least 6 months of living expenses and savings. Really take the time, spend the time creating the right business, spend time learning and experimenting. Like Chris, I was just saying, remember that entrepreneurs usually have started multiple businesses in their lives. Not every business is meant to be forever, and closing a business doesn't mean that you failed.
I love that. Like, yes, yeah, it's not failure, it's learning, right? I think there's a lot of shame sometimes that we can feel when we said we started this thing and now we're putting it down. So thank you so much for that piece of advice. And something I also wanted to point out that Catarina shared, everyone, is the importance of community. That you met other entrepreneurs that you were able to relate to and who gave you advice, that you started also doing like group live events and such, and that was kind of what propelled you, like committed to this other person or this mentor or whatnot, right? Or this partner and like this audience or this community, and so now I have to deliver. So I think that can sometimes be really motivating. So I just wanted to point out, like when you shared that, I was like, yes, like so much of it is about collaboration, especially in the beginning when you're just starting to find your voice. So thanks for that, Jim, as well.
Yes.
So about to wrap up here. I like to do a little rapid fire round before we kind of move into kind of closing. Are you cool with that?
Let's go.
Okay. So, ready? I wasn't supposed to.
I wasn't supposed to be proud of my disability, according to ableism.
The future I am building is.
The future I'm building is inclusive for everyone and values disabled lives.
I am most grateful for.
I'm grateful for the health and safety of my loved ones.
Thanks, Catarina. Well, like I said, we are celebrating Latinx Hispanic Heritage Month this month. It's actually starting tomorrow, right? So before we wrap up, would love for you to share, like, are you doing anything special for the month? Would you like to share with us?
I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements with corporate clients. With some of them, their Latina or Latinx ERGs are collaborating with their disability ERGs to bring me in for a fireside chat that focuses on intersectionality. I love these types of events and getting to speak about multiple identities that I hold. So I'm looking forward to those and just continuing my work with my clients.
That's awesome. I will drop some information if anyone wants to connect with Catarina and for any speaking engagements and such, whether that's this month, next month, in the future, So you can see that in the comments of the event later after we wrap up here. But I think that's it. Generally, also, Built by BIPOC is about connection. And I'm really intentional about doing this show, particularly on LinkedIn Live, because of how easy it is just to hit the button and connect, right? So, if you liked what Catarina had to say today, connect with her, follow. Otherwise, I know you have other accounts as well. As there are other ways in which people can follow you, continue to support your work?
To learn more about my work, my website is the best place to get started. So that's catarinarivera.com or catarinarivera.com. Another great place to start is watching my TEDx talk, Creating Inclusive Workplaces for All. It's only 11 minutes, so everyone has 11 minutes.
Everyone has 11 minutes for sure. All right, I'll drop those links in the comments of this event when we're done. But again, thank you so much, Catarina. Built by BIPOC is weekly. Replays are available, so when you see the next event pop up, hit attend so you can get notified of the replays if you cannot join us live. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I will see you, next Wednesday, same time, same place, and invite your friends. And let's go build things together. Thanks. Bye.